Good afternoon and good morning as well. So good afternoon in Europe, in the Netherlands for the Tilburg team, and as well a good morning for the team in Winnipeg for the University of Manitoba team. My name is Aurélien Orange, and with my colleague Anna Maria Urbanova we'll be hosting this match. This is the second match, day 2, for both teams, for both universities in this 2023 competition of the Hague Inter-University Law Debate Tournament organized by the Corax Foundation with as well the support of Oxford University Press. So I will give the floor to my colleague, of course, and we will be hosting this match, which counts in the group D, where Tilburg and the University of Manitoba are with the University of the West Indies and Dumbledore Law School. So I'll give the floor to my colleague.
Thank you very much. And once more, welcome to the two teams joining us today. And also thank you very much to the judges that will be watching this session. We really appreciate your feedback and the time and expertise you share with the students. So just a short reminder for those of you watching, the debate statement for today's session is that the economic sanctions thus disrupt essential necessities such as food, medicine, and clean water to be regarded as acts of aggression and avoided whenever possible in order to protect well-being of the affected populations. Both teams have received this topic before the match at the same time. They had time to prepare for the session, however, they do not yet know which side of the debate they will receive. That will be done shortly after the introductions. That said, passing the floor to the students present on today's session from Tilburg University, Mr. Kontos.
Hello, pleasure and honor to be here. We're really happy that the University of Manitoba was able to be here today. We got kind of stressed in the beginning. Pleasure to be here. Yeah.
Thank you very much. From University of Manitoba, Mr. Brown, if you can introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name's Liam Brown. I'm likewise very excited to be here. I was born and raised in Winnipeg, and I go to Robson Hall. I'm very excited to proceed with the debate.
Well, thank you very much. Welcome. From Tilburg University, Ms. Samborska. Yes.
Hello. So my name is Lulu Samborska, and we both study global law in the Netherlands. And I'm from Poland, and Spiridon is from Greece. And we're also, very excited to be here.
Welcome. Passing back to University of Manitoba, Ms. Gutierrez.
Hi everyone, so happy to be here as well. My name is Diana Gutierrez and I'm a 2L in the University of Manitoba, and we are happy that we were also able to make it so that we could do this today with you.
Welcome. And from University of Manitoba as well, Mr. Light.
Yes, hi, good morning. My name is Stefan Light. I'm also from the University of Manitoba, of course. And I'm looking forward to the debate today.
Welcome. On today's session, we also have the coach from Tilburg University for their debate team, Mr. Fransavi.
Hi everyone, my name is Rami. I'm also a global law student at Tilburg University, and I participated in the Tilburg's team in the legal debate tournament last year, so I'm coaching this year's team. I'm looking forward to the match. Good luck to both teams.
Thank you and welcome. On that note, passing the floor to my colleague who will shortly share his screen so we can see which positions are for which team.
Yes, so I will share my screen in a few seconds, and you will see, of course, the wheel with the name of the two universities. And at that moment, as soon as I'm sharing now, the right screen. Two positions, of course, for this debate, as usual, in favor and against. So in a few seconds you will see the name of your university and the flags. So two possibilities for Tilburg universities to be in favor, to be against, two possibilities for the University of Manitoba to be in favor and to be against. I will click in the center and we'll know which position you will defend during this match. So this is the position in favor for the University of Manitoba, and as a consequence, the Tilburg University will defend the position against the motion. It means that the University of Manitoba will start the match and will defend the position that economic sanctions that disrupt essential necessities such as food, medicine, and clean water should be regarded as act of aggression and avoided whenever possible in order to protect the well-being of the affected populations, while Tilburg University will defend the position that economic sanctions that disrupt essential necessities such as food, medicines, and clean water should not be regarded as act of aggression, nor avoided whenever possible in order to protect the well-being of the affected populations. So now my colleague will share the screen for the 5 minutes countdown. You can close your camera and audio to review your notes, and then after we start the match.
There's the video incoming.
very much. The final preparation period has now concluded. Starting with the debate team from the University of Manitoba, you have 4 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you, esteemed colleagues and panel. Despite various degrees of sanctions being imposed on North Korea since my grandparents were toddlers, Kim Jong-un looks rather well fed. How can this be? Because sanctions do not impact elites, they impact everyday citizens. And because of this reality, we are proud to propose the motion that economic sanctions that disrupt essential necessities, such as food, medicine, and clean water, should be regarded as acts of aggression and avoided whenever possible in order to protect the well-being of affected populations. Before I proceed, I should clarify that by disrupt, the proposition today means to interfere with, delay, or, of course, outright prevent the arrival of essential goods in a substantial, non-trivial manner. Things like mandatory inspections, difficult licenses to export, and financial penalties are just some of the ways that we see this motion manifesting. The first point I'll be discussing today is that as a matter of international law, sanctions that do disrupt essential goods are and should be considered acts of aggression. There's a very strong statutory backing to this notion. Starting with Article 23 of the 1949 Geneva Convention and its 1977 additional protocols, the Geneva Convention posits that states are under an obligation to ensure the free passage of relief supplies that are exclusively humanitarian and impartial in nature. Looking to the United Nations 1974 Unanimous Resolution 3314 that also defined what international acts of aggression are. Number 3, one of the examples given, is explicitly what is before us today: the blockade of ports or coasts by the armed forces of another state. And of course, if you're enforcing a sanctions regime, that does necessitate interdiction with military forces. Article 7 of the Rome Statute, the founding document of the International Criminal Court, also takes care to include that the, quote, the infliction of conditions of life like the deprivation of access to food and medicine as part of their definition of illegal aggression. Indeed, the African Union similarly includes acts of aggression as affecting either the territorial integrity or human security of other states. So accepted, in fact, is this notion that it is considered customary international law. Rule 55 of the International Red Cross's Customary International Law Handbook stresses that even during wartime, states must allow and facilitate the rapid and unimpeded passage of humanitarian relief. While these are just some of the many, many nations and international bodies who consider such sanctions to be illegal, it's important not just to consider that it is the law, but briefly why. The philosophy underpinning these statutes is that the sanctions are very powerful tools, not because they work to change policy, as my partners will discuss, but because of how devastating they can be on a civilian populace. Something does not need to be as dramatic as dropping a bomb to be hurtful, harmful, and illegal. Without insulin, a diabetic can die in as little as 72 hours. Without antibiotics, an infection can kill in even less time. Withholding such things are acts of aggression. They must be avoided wherever possible, and they certainly are not legal. We are very proud to propose this motion. Thank you.
Thank you for your submission. For the opening statement from the debate team of Tilburg University, you now have 4 minutes.
Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes, you can.
Your Excellencies, because sanctions and embargoes are not the same thing, let us clarify what our burden in this debate is. Our burden is to show you that sanctions specifically are not, on necessities, are not acts of aggression, and that they should not be avoided in order to protect the well-being of affected groups, that being, generally speaking, civilians. First argument, sanctions are not acts of aggression legally speaking. The UNGA Resolution 3314 gave us the definition of aggression as being the use of armed force. If this isn't clear enough, note that the UN prohibition on the use of force through Article 2.4 of the Charter does not include economic means according to legal consensus and the Nicaragua case. Second, sanctions are not our armed force. The intention of Article 2.4 of the Charter was never to include sanctions in the definition either. Proposals to include economic measures in the prohibition on the use of force were made, but they were rejected. For example, the Brazilian proposal. Note here that imposing sanctions means suspending, canceling, withdrawing from some kind of treaty of trade. Why is this true? Because without a trade agreement, no trade happens between states. So in order to impose a sanction, there must be some kind of trade agreement beforehand whose terms will not be followed or changed. Now, we tell you that, and third argument, very few sanctions on necessities are aggressive in nature at all. Many are defensive acts of retorsion or countermeasures which are completely valid morally and legally. That is, you can impose a sanction that changes the terms of a treaty you have signed, and if this is in the context of a countermeasure, that would be legitimate. Let's get deeper into this. First, most sanctions are a retorsion on countermeasures or countermeasures. Why is this true? Because sanctions on necessities are not comparable to tariffs, in that their intention is to induce a change of behavior in a state in the context of some level of conflict, rather than pursuing a maximization of economic interests. To clarify, such sanctions are not applied to protect domestic industries. They're most often applied in response to grave violations of international human rights law, crimes of aggression, and violation of treaty obligations. This is because of their high level of severity. Sanctions on necessities have significantly more social impact rather than economic. Not exporting corn into a country doesn't really make a huge difference to anybody's economy. Rather, it makes a difference to the people that are going to suffer because of lesser access to that kind of food. So, why is retorsion or a countermeasure a fair justification for sanctions? Not much to be said about retorsions. Their actions lawful according to international law by definition. Now, more meaningful, however, countermeasures are relevant in this debate. International law allows sanctions in the context of a sanction fundamentally being the suspension of a trade agreement as a response to unlawful behavior by a state, which is very commonplace. Countermeasures, according to RCWA, through Article 49.2, allow temporary suspension of treaty performance, so sanctions are legitimate. Through Article 48, they tell us when they can happen. Like, for example, when there's a breach of duty owed to the countermeasuring state or to the international community, and granted, the principle of proportionality applies here. This means that inducing a state to act lawfully can be entirely justified, for example, in the case of the EU states attempting to induce Russia to stop her crime of aggression. Considering defensive actions, sanctions can often be deployed defensively. Classifying them as acts of aggression would be problematic and at odds with the interests of protecting the well-being of civilians. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Passing back to University of Manitoba, you have 2 minutes for your first rebuttal.
Thank you. Imposing sanctions is like playing Russian roulette, where all the chambers are loaded and the people pulling your trigger are the civilians. Sure, a sanction is not an embargo, but over time the effects are still the same, and a slow death is still a death. In 1919, President Woodrow Wilson described sanctions as something more tremendous than war. The threat of sanctions was an absolute isolation that brings a nation to its senses, just as suffocation removes from the individual all inclination to fight. Apply this economic, peaceful, silent, deadly remedy, and there will be no need for force. And it does not cost a life outside of the nation boycotted. During World War I, the Allies implemented sanctions on the Central Powers. Today, scholars estimate that about 2 million people died from starvation and disease. If the goal is to change a state's policy, then we must target its leaders, because sanctions are truly felt by the masses and not them. As of 2021, for instance, the UN estimates that the US economic policy against Cuba has cost its economy approximately $130 billion. This affects their trade, which has created food scarcity, inflation, material shortages, and interrupted public services, which has detrimentally jeopardized the health of its most vulnerable citizens. The embargo, which was reintroduced and supercharged under Trump, meant that during COVID, countries that had previously traded with Cuba were deterred because of the disincentives created by the US, like Swiss companies canceling their contracts for the sale of ventilators, or sanctions on biotech equipment, which is used to save vaccines. Sure, it's a US policy. Other countries can trade with Cuba, but clearly deterrents have the exact same offense and the consequences are lethal. These sanctions disrupt basic necessities and they do amount to acts of aggression. Thank you.
Thank you very much. University of Tilburg, you have 2 minutes for your first rebuttal.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, so I'm visible and audible.
Yes, you are.
So, dear opponents and dear judges, dear audience, I'm going to continue with our argumentation on how sanctions can actually encourage legal behavior. So for this, we need to think who actually is the recipient of sanctions. Most likely, we think that these are countries that are violating already international law, right? So we're talking about countries like Russia, that my partner already mentioned, or North Korea, that the other team mentioned. So why are sanctions used? We think they are used to induce legal behavior. And do they work? We think that they do, because sanctions cause instability to governments. They undermine the authority of governments by causing them to fail in their most fundamental duty that they have to fulfill towards their citizens that have basic needs. So interest groups across those states that we're sanctioning will try to push the government to correct its behavior in order to alleviate the pain and instability that is caused by sanctions. So we recognize that instability may be caused, but we think that this is precisely the benefit that we have on our side. For example, sanctions introduced in the aftermath of the Gulf War increased Iraqi compliance with resolutions calling for the complete elimination of its weapons of mass destruction. So why is this important in the context of this debate? Violations of international law most often harm civilians. Notice that these are violations committed by the very states that we're sanctioning. Violations of human rights, crimes of international law, etc., they can be prevented through deterrence or through correcting a behavior of states that are not complying with them, through imposition of sanctions. We need to protect the well-being of civilians, and we can do that uniquely through sanctions.
Thank you very much for your submission. For the second rebuttal, the debate team from University of Manitoba, you have 2 minutes.
Despite what our friends might assert, in the majority of cases, sanctions don't actually fulfill, and trade agreements don't necessarily have to be in France. They did point out that countermeasures can be implemented. However, there is a strict procedural requirement per Article 49, 51, and 52 of RCWA. This preliminary criteria requires that countermeasures must be enacted as a response to wrongful acts, not as preliminary actions. If they truly work, then what about Cuba? The sanctions have been in place since the 60s. 80 years later, they have yet to achieve the intended goal, and they're no longer supported by the international community. As of 2021, 184 countries voted against these sanctions. And at this point, we need to ask, what is the US deterring? This isn't cooperation, but rogue sovereignty, and the international community can't even do anything about it because it let them do it in the first place. As for countries for Iran, once again, sanctions have been in place since the 1979. Financial sanctions were imposed, which froze $8.1 billion of Iranian assets. 1984, the prohibition of weapons and US assistance to Iran during the Iran-Iraq War. 1995, investments on Iranian energy and trade are banned. 1996, Iranian and Libyan sanctions restrict trade for both US and non-US companies. In 2006, these sanctions were renewed for 10 more years, but now they only apply to Iran. These will be in place until 2026. They're clearly not deterring them of anything because as of February of this year, a boat full of weapons and missiles were found to be heading from Iran straight to Yemen. Relying on an example, if our friends might suggest, of instances such as apartheid, don't work. A regime inherently built on degradation of human rights, which is already on the brink of collapse, doesn't prove that sanctions work, and therefore, these amount to acts of aggressions that should be avoided. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Debate team from University of Tilburg, you have 2 minutes for your second rebuttal.
Your Excellencies, quick argument. Sanctions can help avoid larger scale conflict as a non-military means alternative of defending against a threat or preemptively defending so without resorting to armed conflict. They provide sufficient force to change another state's behavior, as we told you in our example, but are not military in nature, which makes them inherently less harmful to civilians. The ability to use sanctions as an outlet for interstate conflict means that states have a lesser need for higher forms of conflict, like, for example, the embargoes that were brought up by the proposition. And another quick argument, we believe that the ability of a state to control which states it trade with is not aggression, it's just a right that should be respected, derivative of a state's principle of sovereignty, which determines it has the right to who I'm trading with, and that has been affirmed in the Nicaragua case by the ICJ and by the Lotus principle of international law. Having said that, quick rebuttal. We believe that proposition's case is factually flawed on the idea of what the sanction is. They told us that sanction can be a blockade or sanction can be restricting access to traders so moves cannot move around as easily. No. A blockade is a military measure, as is an embargo, which is what they're describing. A sanction is, I will not let my citizens sell you X good. And we believe that this as a measure is not on the same level as embargoes on impact, which is why we prefer it as an alternative. The second thing that they told us as their main argument was that targeting leaders is more effective somehow, but we don't really see why. Because elites have money, no matter how much their sanctions, no matter how much they're sanctioned, no matter what is done to them, we don't see them having an incentive to stop problematic behavior. On our side of the house, pressure is more real. And we believe that because of a mechanism explained by our partner Lulu, we're more effective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Entering conclusion of the session, debating from University of Manitoba, you have 2 minutes.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Good morning. So one point of clarification needs to be made before we can get into our boil down. What exactly do sanctions include? They, of course, include the trade of goods, but they can also include financial measures, and it is in the wording of the resolution, it is implicit in the resolution that sanctions regimes can disrupt the trade of necessary goods for civilian populations. With that in mind, let's take a look at what this debate is really about. What ultimately leads to the greatest contribution to human well-being, on side proposition or side opposition? What side opposition tell you is that these sanction regimes actually work, that they are effective, that they manage to create change. However, let's examine them in reality. When we look at the sanctions regimes that get implemented, the primary victims are always the civilian population of a nation. It is the civilian population who have to line up for goods shortages outside of grocery stores, the civilian population who don't get fuel to heat their homes or to travel around. It is the human civilian population of a country that is always the primary victims of these sanction regimes that disrupt the flow of essential goods. These long-standing sanctions, furthermore, do not work. If we look at the DPRK, at Iran, at Cuba, these sanctions have been in place for decades, and they did nothing to deter these nations. They weren't even able to disrupt their original purpose, which was to prevent the building of nuclear weapons in the case of North Korea. As we see, that has failed tremendously. So what side should we fall on today? On side proposition, we tell you that the way forward as a multilateral international community is to work together, to trade, and to ensure that the civilian populations of a nation do not fall victim to starvation, to famine, and medical or fuel shortages. And for those reasons, we are very proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Debate team from Tilburg University, you have 2 minutes for your conclusion.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Dear audience, dear judge panel, and dear opposition. Firstly, I'd like to say towards all of the examples that they're giving are very oppressive regimes that already violate the human rights of their citizens. So we don't think the sanctions are the tipping point that make life of civilians worse in those regimes, right? Because life in North Korea, unfortunately, is pretty terrible anyway. But the thing that we do is we pressure the governments, and we think that, as we have shown in a lot of cases, that does work. So we have told you that the ability of a state to control which states it trades with, which is precisely sanctions, that's not aggression, that's a right that the state has that follows from the right of sovereignty. A state can trade whoever they want with. Secondly, we told you that sanctions help avoid a larger scale military conflict that would be the alternative, most likely, on their side of the house, because there are few other measures that could be taken in such cases when states want to pressure other states, right? So sanctions actually help avoid suffering that's larger than military conflict. Thirdly, we told you that sanctions aren't simply imposed out of the blue, right? The sanctions are a response at the violations that already occur in the first place. It's not like basically sanctions are always a response to something that the state has already done. Lastly, we told you that legally speaking, and we cited UN General Assembly resolutions and other legal sources, we told you that legally speaking, sanctions are simply not aggression. So we think that on the clash of whether it is aggression, side opposition should win, and on the clash of whether it is effective and whether we are able to apply pressure in that way and avoid larger suffering, we also win because we prevent military conflict.
Thank you very much, and well done to both teams on your research, preparation, and execution of your preparation during the debate session now. This marks the end of the graded part of the session. So starting onwards, you can relax. We'll do a short feedback session where you can look back into how was it your preparation, how did you find the match, and if perhaps you already encountered this topic during your studies. So on that note, giving the floor to a member of the team from University of Manitoba, Mr. Brown. How did you find the preparation, the match?
It was very enjoyable. Sanctions are such a rich topic, and there's so many directions to go that I had a lot of fun. And I actually think, if anything, I wish I had a little more time to talk about it, and I wish we had more time to go back and forth. But well done, and thank you again for having us.
Thank you very much. Mr. Spurden from Tilburg University, how did you find the preparation, the match?
I would like to concur with my opponent from the University of Manitoba. We also believed that the topic was really interesting, and especially we were talking about how these principles would apply to real conflicts, like, for example, the Russia-Ukrainian war, and we thought that was super interesting, but some element of self-control had to be applied. Still enjoyable, but a bittersweet feeling on what it could be.
Thank you very much for your feedback, and perhaps adding the question into the mix of if you encountered this subject already during your studies. And Ms. Gutierrez from University of Manitoba.
I have not encountered it in my studies, only adjacently through a previous MOOC that I've done, though it wasn't my particular issue. So it was very, very enjoyable to dive in and learn more about this particular area of law that is obviously very, very relevant today, as Spiriton mentioned. And it was just a fun challenging yourself to think about it from all the different angles.
Thank you very much. Ms. Samborska, how did you find the match?
So I agree with my partner and with the team from Canada. For us, it was certainly an interesting match. Personally, we have dealt a bit with this topic in the curriculum, however, not so in depth. And this debate definitely pushed me to catch up on research in this field. So I'm really glad that it gave me this opportunity because I think it's an incredibly interesting topic. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Mr. Light, how was the experience for you?
Yes, yeah, thank you very, very much. I dziękuję bardzo. But I enjoyed mówię trochę po polsku, but I enjoyed the debate very much. I haven't encountered this topic quite yet during my studies. Hopefully later on, but yeah, I enjoyed the debate, like everyone mentioned, and it was really interesting to delve into this. It's so topical nowadays. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Fransavi, how did you find the experience this time from the coaching position as well, perhaps?
I mean, it was a really interesting topic. I wasn't too involved in this round's coaching as I was last time. It's been a busy period, but it's a really interesting topic. I agree with Liam actually about how many different directions you can go in when it comes to sanctions. Like, there's so many different examples you can use, so many directions you can go in, and so many like legal principles and legal documents that are relevant. So I think it was a really interesting debate. Yeah, it was really enjoyable to watch.
Thank you very much for your feedback. On that note, I would like to pass the floor to my colleague who will be concluding the session. Once more from my side, well done to both teams.
Yes, congratulations to both teams for your performance. It was very enjoyable indeed to listen to indeed the different angles you took during this debate. So we are in the day 2 of this competition. It means that the next match will be the last one of the group phase, so in 2 weeks. One thing, of course, we do traditionally is to ask, of course, the teams about their travel plans or maybe travel history. So we'd like to ask, for example, in Tilburg University, Mr. Spiridon Kontos and Miss Samborska, have you been in Canada already?
I think we both haven't been to Canada yet, unfortunately, but speaking for myself, I think for both of us, we would love to go. We have some professors from Canada teaching us, so we do encounter the typical Canadian accent, but generally it seems like a fantastic country, and we would love to travel there, I think.
I'm definitely coming next year. Be ready for me.
Oh.
So, okay, so yeah, we have to keep contact, and of course, after this match, knowing that I think in Winnipeg it's around the same weather than we have at this moment in the Netherlands. It's pretty cold in the Netherlands. And on the side of the University of Manitoba, is there anybody who have been in the Netherlands or even in Poland or in Greece? Because the two students are from those countries. So, could you tell us?
We all been to the Netherlands?
I've been to the Netherlands.
Yeah, I think we've all been actually.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Lovely. So Greece and Poland are still on my bucket list for sure.
I've been to Poland, but yeah, I have family there. But yeah, I've been to the Netherlands just the once, so and I hope to see it again.
Okay, and did you travel to visit institutions or just holidays?
I was there for the 70th. There was the 70th anniversary of victory in Europe, so my school sent a group of students to travel. So we went there, and I got to meet Princess Beatrice because she was of course born in Ottawa.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was just a one time for me.
Yeah, I went for the famous Tulip Festival that happens in the spring, and toured around Rotterdam, The Hague, Leiden, Kinderjik, and I'd love to go to many more places.
And I was just another annoying North American tourist with a backpack.
Okay.
I went to The Hague and Amsterdam, and you have a beautiful, beautiful country. I want to come back.
Okay, so you're welcome, of course, as well to maybe for an internship, for a job. We never know. Huh? If you study international law, you'll be working, of course, in that field. So, and of course, in Tilburg, because they are very active, they could as well show you around. That's certainly. So, I would like to thank all of you for connecting and as well for making this match to happen as well, because indeed it was difficult beginning, but finally we managed to do it. The last match, of course, will be against the last team you did not meet yet in your group. Having in mind that you already, each team got one victory, so it means this match is determining as well the result of this match to be qualified already for the 8th finals. So with 2 victories, as you can imagine, you can finish first or second of the group. So already. But yes, we'll know that, of course, in a few days. And so many thanks for preparing this match, for debating. Many thanks to my colleague as well for hosting. Last word for my colleague.
I would like to thank my colleague for holding the session, and once more to the teams for connecting and preparing for the match. It was very interesting to hear your arguments.
Yeah, and it was good to see Mr. Fransawi from last year as well, indeed, who was the one who was debating with his fellows on behalf of Tilburg. So good to see you, Mr. Fransawi. Yeah. Okay, so see you next time. Oh, yes, sorry, you wanted to tell? Oh, good? Okay. So yes, see you next time then for the third match of the day 3 at the end of March. And of course, you will receive 7 days in advance, of course, the topic for your respective match. Many thanks and have a good weekend, of course. Bye-bye.
Thank you.